They called me a witch at my son's funeral, loud enough for the whole town to hear. But when secrets came clawing from the grave, the truth threatened to tear our family apart. Betrayal runs deep, and in this house, love is just another weapon. I lost my son, but I'll make sure no one ever forgets what really happened that day. This is the story of how the curse was broken and who paid the price. I never thought the world could become so small, so quickly. Not until I stepped out of the funeral car and into the biting wind, clutching the black envelope in my gloved hands. The sky overhead was a dull, merciless gray, thick with the kind of clouds that never seemed to move. As I stepped forward, every eye found me, and every whispered word seemed to circle my head like smoke. I straightened my coat. My heels sank into the wet grass, the hem catching on a thorny vine. All around me, familiar faces gathered, but not one felt familiar anymore. I caught a flash of my cousin Vera's pitying gaze from beneath her pillbox hat. Behind her, Uncle Russ murmured something to Aunt Linda, both of them glancing quickly away as I approached. They never did like me much, said I was too stubborn for my own good, especially after Wyatt left. But today nobody said a word. They just watched. I searched for Harper in the crowd. She stood at the far edge, spine rigid, arms locked tight across her chest as if bracing against a storm only she could feel. Her hair, usually styled and perfect, hung in damp strands over her face. She didn't look at me, not at first. She stared at the casket, my son's casket, like she might splinter if she looked away. A lump rose in my throat. My fingers curled around the envelope, knuckles white. My mind reeled backward, spinning through years. Elijah's small hands gripping my waist when he was afraid of thunderstorms. His first bike ride, the day he graduated high school, the laughter in his voice when he called me on Sundays just to say he was okay. Those memories snapped through my mind like flashbulbs. Sharp, bright, gone in an instant. Wyatt's face flickered through, too. The day he walked out, the way Elijah clung to me, both of us too stunned to cry. I raised my son alone. I did the best I could, even when I barely knew what that meant. And now he was gone. I was here, alone, again. I took a shaky breath and made my way to the casket, heart pounding, skin prickling with the weight of 100 eyes. As I reached out to steady myself, my hand brushed the polished wood. I felt the grooves in the grain, cold and real, a brutal reminder that this was no nightmare. My wedding ring caught the light, a tiny, useless glint on a hand that felt 1,000 years old. A hush fell over the mourners as the minister spoke, reading hollow prayers that bounced off the casket and drifted away. Harper still hadn't looked at me, not really. She bit her lip, knuckles turning white against her coat. Suddenly she stepped forward. The wind whipped her skirt around her knees. For a second, her eyes met mine, green, fierce, brimming with something far uglier than grief. She didn't whisper. She didn't lower her voice for the sake of the dead. "You're nothing but an old witch," Harper said, her voice trembling with rage. "You ruined everything." The words sliced through the cold air, shattering whatever fragile piece the day had left. Gasps rose all around. Someone dropped a program. I felt the world tilt. I braced myself against the casket, afraid I might fall. Aunt Linda's mouth dropped open. Russ shook his head, muttering something about inappropriate behavior. Cousin Vera took a nervous step back, avoiding my eyes. All the whispers, the blame, the old stories, they'd finally spilled out, ugly and raw, right here beside my son's grave. I could feel my face flush. Every part of me wanted to disappear, to melt into the ground, to run, to howl at the sky until the world split open. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Harper wasn't finished. "You never cared about anyone but yourself. Elijah was miserable because of you. You controlled him, suffocated him. You couldn't stand that he loved someone else." I wanted to defend myself. The words pressed up against my teeth, desperate to spill out. I wanted to scream that I'd loved my son more than my own life, that every decision, every argument was because I wanted what was best for him, that Harper had always hated me, twisting Elijah's loyalty into something sharp and brittle. But my voice wouldn't come, not with everyone watching, not with my heart in pieces at my feet. Harper's face was blotched with tears and fury. "You should be ashamed. You should have been the one in that coffin." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. My hand trembled, nails digging into my palm. I felt the heat of humiliation burn through me, sharp and blinding. My wedding ring gleamed again, a stubborn piece of the past refusing to disappear. For a moment, I almost believed her. Maybe I was the villain. Maybe I'd ruined everything. I looked at Elijah's casket, at the flowers, the photographs, the childhood drawings tucked inside for one last goodbye. My boy, my only son, lost to me forever. A voice inside me, soft at first, then stronger, rose up, the voice that had gotten me through Wyatt's departure, through years of single motherhood, through every sideways glance and cruel rumor in this town, the voice that kept me alive. Number, I will not be silenced. I will not let her break me, not today. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet Harper's glare. I stood straighter, squared my shoulders, forced my hand to steady on the casket. I wanted her to see that I was not afraid, that she hadn't destroyed me. The minister stumbled over his words, trying to regain control. The mourners shifted, uncomfortable, not sure where to look. I could feel their judgment like needles in my skin, but I kept my eyes forward. I listened as the prayers resumed, each word ringing hollow but necessary, a thin thread tying me to reality. Through the rest of the ceremony, I stood tall. I didn't speak, didn't flinch when Harper hurled one last glare at me before turning away. I held my head high, even as my heart shattered in my chest. As the mourners drifted off, one by one, I lingered at the casket. My hand rested on the polished wood, wedding ring glinting, cold wind twisting my hair around my face. In that moment, I made myself a silent promise. I would survive this. I would find the truth about Elijah, about Harper, about myself. No matter how deep the wounds, I would not be broken. Not today, not ever. If I close my eyes, I can still see the house on Maple Lane as it was in those years. Shabby but sturdy, sunlight catching on dust motes in the hallways, photos of Elijah everywhere. That house was my fortress and my prison. The town we lived in prided itself on knowing everyone's business, and a woman alone was a story they couldn't resist rewriting. Raising Elijah alone after Wyatt left was never easy. I worked double shifts at the diner, sometimes leaving him asleep in his room before dawn, coming home long after dark. I tried to fill both roles, father and mother, but there were days I was too tired to be either. The neighbors pretended sympathy, but their eyes always lingered too long, hungry for something to gossip about. Elijah grew up in that silence, learning early how to hide the truth. He was always my soft place to land. From his earliest years, Elijah had an instinct for comfort, his small hand in mine after a rough shift, his laughter filling the kitchen when I burned another casserole. But he changed as he grew. He became restless, hungry for something that I, with my tired hands and old hopes, couldn't offer him. Sometimes I wondered if he resented me for it, if the sacrifices I made were just invisible burdens he'd spent his life trying to shrug off. Harper entered our lives during Elijah's last year of college. I remember the first night he brought her home. Her pressed white shirt, perfect posture, the way her eyes scanned every corner of the living room as if cataloging its failures. She smiled politely, but it never reached her eyes. Her words were crisp and precise, each one delivered with the faintest hint of disdain. "I've heard so much about you," she said, voice syrupy and cold. "Elijah tells me you're traditional." I tried to meet her halfway, asking about her family, her studies, her plans. She answered every question with a glint of challenge, as if daring me to disapprove. The evening passed in a fog of careful silences and polite barbs. After she left, Elijah lingered at the door, not quite meeting my gaze. "She's different, Mom. She gets me." I smiled, not trusting myself to say more. But that night, I found myself replaying every word, every look, searching for the crack I must have caused. Lorraine, my sister, had always been a presence in our lives, sharp-tongued, always quick to remind me of my failures. She had her own family, but her envy ran deep, hidden beneath jokes and backhanded compliments. "I don't know why you bend over backwards for that boy," she said more than once. "You spoil him, just like Mom did with you." She'd show up unannounced, criticize my parenting, pick fights over things that didn't matter. Sometimes I'd hear her whispering with neighbors about me, never outright cruel, just enough to seed doubt. Dean, Elijah's oldest friend, was a fixture in our home since childhood, always hanging around the porch, tracking mud through the kitchen, fixing broken things I never had time to repair. He was loyal to Elijah, but something in him was haunted, as if carrying burdens too big for his narrow shoulders. Harper didn't like Dean. She made that clear from the start. The rift between Harper and me grew, subtle at first. A cold glance, a clipped remark at dinner. "You're old-fashioned," she'd say, half smiling. "Maybe it's time Elijah grew up." Her words lodged under my skin, small barbs that festered. She began to draw Elijah away from me, first gently, then with unmistakable force. Family holidays grew tense. Harper changed the recipes, refused my help, insisted on new traditions. Elijah stopped calling as much. He'd show up late, leave early, glancing at Harper for permission before answering my questions. Once I found the family photo albums shoved in a box in the basement, pictures missing, faces cut out. When I asked, Harper shrugged. "We're starting fresh. No need for the past to haunt us." Even Lorraine, who'd spent years needling me, grew wary. She cornered me after one Thanksgiving, her voice unusually low. "Blood runs thick, but resentment runs thicker. Don't let her drive a wedge between you two. She's clever, that one." I tried to laugh it off, but the words echoed in my chest for days. Was Harper truly turning Elijah against me? Or was I just jealous, threatened by a woman who'd replaced me in my son's heart? Doubt became my constant companion. Every argument, every cold silence, I wondered if I'd failed somehow. Maybe I was too strict, too traditional. Maybe my love was a chain instead of a gift. Dean tried to reach out. He'd drop by with tools, fix a leaky faucet, talk about Elijah's latest promotion or plans. But even he seemed shut out, frustrated by Harper's polite walls and Elijah's growing distance. "She's got him wrapped around her finger," Dean muttered once, after Harper had left the room. "I hardly recognize him anymore." He hesitated. "You don't think he's unhappy, do you?" I wanted to say no, but I couldn't. Not honestly. The years went on. Traditions faded. Birthdays passed with store-bought cakes and awkward silences. The house felt emptier, even when it was full of people. Lorraine stopped coming around. Dean visited less. Harper's influence grew. Elijah deferred to her on everything, even what I cooked for Sunday dinners. I watched my family dissolve piece by piece until the portrait I'd clung to for so long was barely recognizable. Family photos lined the hallway. Over time, I noticed more and more faces missing. First Wyatt, then Lorraine's kids, then Dean. Each frame felt heavier, more burden than memory. The guilt gnawed at me. Had I really become the villain in my own home? Did Elijah hate me? Did Harper have reason to despise me? Or was I simply in the way of the life she wanted? I didn't have answers, only regret. The funeral felt like a final test. I watched Harper from the edge of the crowd, her composure brittle, her eyes darting. And then, as mourners drifted away, I saw her step toward a stranger, a man in a black coat, face hidden by his hat. They spoke in hushed tones, Harper glancing over her shoulder, pressing a velvet pouch into his hand. He nodded once and melted into the crowd. Something icy slid down my spine. Whatever I thought I knew about Harper, about my own family, I realized it was only the surface. There were secrets here, dark and dangerous, and I was only just beginning to see the cracks. Resentment is never born in a single moment. It festers, growing quietly in the shadows between words left unsaid and wounds left to rot. Looking back, I can trace every step that led Harper and me to this cold, silent war, 1,000 little cracks spreading through the foundation of what was once a home. I remember the early years, still hopeful that Harper and I might find a truce. I told myself it was normal, this awkward distance, the way she bristled when I offered advice or tried to share in their happiness. But as the seasons changed, so did Harper. Her hostility was never loud, never direct. She didn't shout or slam doors. She simply erased the things that made our family ours. It started with the recipes. Our Thanksgiving table had always been a patchwork of tradition. My mother's green bean casserole, Elijah's favorite cornbread stuffing, my late husband's cranberry relish. The first year Harper hosted, the dishes were different. Lighter, trendier, unrecognizable. She handed me a store-bought pie, smiling too brightly. "Thought we'd try something new this year. Don't want to get stuck in old ways." I stood in her kitchen, hands empty. the scent of cinnamon and sage missing from the air. It was a small thing, but it felt like a door closing. The next year, she announced that Christmas dinner would be just the two of them, their own new tradition. I found the door to their house locked when I arrived with a plate of gingerbread cookies. No one answered my knock. I stood on the porch as the snow fell, watching shadows flicker in the windows. The family cookbook, a battered, stained notebook filled with handwritten recipes and memories, disappeared one spring. I tore the pantry apart, asked Elijah if he'd seen it. He shrugged, distracted. Later, I found it in the backyard fire pit, the edges singed, pages curled and blackened. Harper claimed she was tidying up. She said it with a shrug, as if it didn't matter, as if history could be thrown away like so much clutter. With every little erasure, Harper worked on Elijah. She planted seeds of doubt, reframed every memory, every argument, every compromise as evidence of my control. She told him I was meddling, manipulative, unable to let go. He started calling less, answering my texts with clipped replies or not at all. When I did see him, there was a tightness to his smile, a guardedness in his eyes. "Mom, you have to let me live my life. Harper and I are building something new. You don't always have to be in the middle of it." He said it gently, but the words cut deep. Was that what he really believed? Or was it Harper's voice I was hearing through his lips? Lorraine's bitterness bubbled up more often in those years. She'd always accused me of favoring Elijah, especially after Wyatt left us. She resented every accomplishment, every milestone, every scrap of attention he received. Her own children struggled, jobs lost, marriages ended, and she never let me forget it. "You always did put him on a pedestal. No wonder he fell," Lorraine hissed at me one night, after too many glasses of boxed wine. Her words slithered into the cracks of my self-doubt. I wanted to defend myself, to remind her of all the nights I sat up worrying over her kids, the birthday gifts, the bail money sent in secret. But resentment is a stubborn thing. It doesn't listen to reason. Dean tried to stay close to Elijah, tried to keep some thread of the past alive. He'd come by the house, offer to help with repairs, try to draw Elijah out for a fishing trip or a game, but Harper always had a reason to say no. Too busy, too tired. Maybe next time. When Dean and I talked, she watched us with narrowed eyes, lips pressed thin. Once, after a particularly tense Sunday dinner, Dean pulled me aside. "She's driving a wedge, can't you see? Elijah's not himself around her. You're not the only one losing him." But Harper was clever. She caught on, twisting every interaction to her advantage. If Dean came by when Elijah was at work, she'd tell Elijah I was conspiring against them, making trouble. If I tried to plan a family gathering, she'd convince Elijah I was being overbearing, desperate for attention. No matter what I did, it was wrong. One night, desperate to reconnect, I called Elijah and invited him to lunch, just the two of us. He agreed, but showed up late, tense, glancing at his phone. Our conversation was stilted. Every topic felt dangerous, every memory a minefield. At one point, I reached across the table, trying to touch his hand. "Elijah, I miss you, I miss us. Is there something I've done?" He pulled away, voice flat. "Harper says you'll never accept her, that you can't stand not being in control." I sat back, swallowing my heartbreak. The words weren't his, not really. My house, once filled with laughter and chaos, grew silent. Holidays passed in quiet resignation. I found myself wandering from room to room, looking at photos on the walls. Weddings, birthdays, summer afternoons. Over the years, more and more faces were gone from those frames. Some lost to time, some to choice. The photos themselves faded, curling at the corners. Family was something that belonged to other people, not to me. The worst was the feeling that I no longer belonged anywhere. Not in Elijah's life, not in Lorraine's, not even in my own home. I was a guest everywhere I went, tolerated out of habit, not love. Guilt gnawed at me. Had I smothered Elijah? Had I loved him too fiercely, demanded too much, failed to see him as his own man? Or was this simply Harper's narrative, pressed into him until it became his own? The answer never came. Only more silence, more cold shoulders, more traditions lost to time and resentment. One evening, as the last light bled out of the sky, I returned to Harper and Elijah's house to drop off a birthday card. I let myself in quietly, not wanting to intrude. As I walked down the hall, I heard Harper's voice through a crack in the door, low, urgent, unfamiliar. "Now that she's all alone," she whispered, her words sharp as knives, "she'll have no choice but to break." There was a pause. I couldn't hear the reply, but Harper laughed, soft, triumphant. Something heavy settled in my chest, colder than grief, heavier than anger. I backed away, heart racing, and let myself out the back door. It was then I understood. The well of resentment between us wasn't an accident. It was cultivated, fed by Harper's need for power, Lorraine's envy, my own blind love. I was the last to see it, but I wouldn't be the last to suffer from it. It's strange, the way the past clings to you. I used to believe that time would loosen its grip, that if I worked hard enough and loved fiercely enough, I could outrun what came before. But now, with Elijah gone and Harper's shadow stretching long over everything I built, the old ghosts have come calling again. I dream about my childhood house sometimes, a small, sagging thing at the edge of a gravel road, paint flaking, windows always dirty. My mother's voice was everywhere in that place, sharp as a slap. She believed in strength above all else. "Weakness," she'd hiss, pinching my arm when I cried, "is the fastest way to lose everything. Don't be soft. Don't be like me." She loved me in her own way, but it was a love doled out like rations, never enough, never gentle. My father had left long before I understood what leaving meant. It was just the three of us, my mother, Lorraine, and me. Lorraine craved affection and attention. She fought for it, sometimes literally, clawing for scraps of approval that I often won by being quiet, by shrinking. I learned to bottle my feelings, to build walls, to never admit when I was scared. I carried those lessons into motherhood, believing they would protect Elijah, keep us both safe. But the patterns have a way of finding you. I see them in Harper now, the way she controls the air in a room, the sharp looks, the need to be right. She despises weakness too, but her definition of it is anyone who challenges her. Sometimes I wonder if she sees herself in me, or if I just remind her of someone she can't stand. I'm haunted by the idea that, by surviving my own mother, I've become her in ways I never wanted. Lorraine is blunt when she wants to wound me. She called after the funeral, her voice flat and cold. "You're just like her, you know, our mother." Maybe that's why Elijah pulled away. Maybe Harper isn't the only one to blame. Her words lodged inside me like a splinter. I tried to protest, to explain that I was only ever trying to protect Elijah, to give him what I never had. But the more I tried, the more hollow it sounded, even to me. Maybe Lorraine was right. Maybe all I'd done was repeat old mistakes, twisting love into something he had to escape. I carry these doubts everywhere now. At 3 in the morning, I sit up in bed and replay every argument, every decision, every warning my mother ever gave. I wonder if I made things worse by trying so hard to avoid her fate. Was I too controlling? Did I push Elijah into Harper's arms out of fear he'd leave me too? Sometimes I catch my own reflection, lined face, weary eyes, and flinch, certain I've become the woman I ran from for decades. Misogyny, I know, isn't just outside. It seeps in, quiet, poisonous. I hear it in my own voice. The need to be perfect, the shame at wanting comfort, the constant doubt that I deserve anything at all. I raised my son to be strong and independent, but did I ever let him be vulnerable? Did I ever allow myself that softness? I can't answer. I only know the cost. Harper's treatment of me echoes things I thought I'd left behind. Her snide remarks about overbearing mothers, her relentless policing of boundaries, her insistence that Elijah should cut the cord. I hear the same cruelty my mother used to wield. But now it's Harper's tongue, Harper's rules. Sometimes when I walk past their house and see the way Elijah shrinks from conflict, I see a scared little boy again, caught between women who love him in all the wrong ways. The memories of Elijah's childhood are sharper now. His night terrors, his anxious stutter, the way he'd hide behind me whenever Lorraine yelled. I'd thought I was shielding him, but perhaps I was just handing him a different kind of armor, one that never quite fit. Now, seeing Harper use the same tactics, I wonder if I ever broke the cycle at all, or just passed it along. I drove by my old family home last week, abandoned, windows smashed, grass growing tall and wild. The place looks smaller than I remember, but the feeling of dread is exactly the same. I parked for a moment, staring at the crooked porch where my mother used to sit, chain smoking, watching the road for men who never came back. Sometimes I feel like that's my destiny too, waiting for someone who's already gone, trapped by the same old patterns. Dean is the only person I can talk to now. Everyone else has turned away, wary of Harper's accusations and the stink of scandal. Dean listens without judgment, hands calloused, eyes tired but kind. One evening, over coffee, I finally let it all spill out. The fear, the shame, the memories that won't let me go. Pain runs in circles, Dean says quietly, stirring his coffee. But you can break it, if you want to. I want to believe him, but the walls keep closing in. Harper's campaign has gone public. She tells neighbors I'm unstable, spreading rumors that I harassed her, even hinting I might be responsible for Elijah's unhappiness. People cross the street to avoid me now. The pastor's wife, once my friend, turns her face away at the grocery store. I have never felt so alone, so watched, so utterly powerless. The worst part is doubting myself. When everyone else is so sure I'm wrong, so ready to believe Harper's stories, it's hard not to wonder if they're right. Maybe I am as poisonous as my mother, as Lorraine. Maybe the pain I tried to escape is simply part of me. Inescapable, inevitable. But Dean doesn't let me sink too far. One stormy night, he comes by unannounced, water dripping from his coat. There's a wild urgency in his eyes I haven't seen before. I found something, he says, lowering his voice. I've been looking into Harper's past. She's not who she says she is. She's been married before, at least twice. And her last mother-in-law? She vanished. No one knows what happened to her. The world tilts. I grip the edge of the table, heart racing. Dean's voice is steady, but his hands shake. This isn't just about you or even Elijah. Something is wrong here. Really wrong. You have to be careful. The air feels thin. Everything I thought I knew about pain, about inheritance, about women's wars, it all suddenly feels like prelude to something darker, something that reaches far beyond me. And yet, beneath the fear, a new resolve begins to stir. The past might be a circle, but maybe, just maybe, I can find a way to break it before it destroys anyone else. Grief is not just an emotion, it's a substance, a heaviness that settles in your lungs and bones, suffocating you from the inside. I wake each morning with the weight of Elijah's absence pressing down on my chest, as if the very act of breathing is defiance. Even the air tastes different now, tinged with regret, and something bitter I can't name. The house is quieter than ever. I walk from room to room, trailed by silence, haunted by the ghosts of laughter and argument that once filled these walls. Elijah's shoes still sit by the door. His jacket still hangs in the closet, limp and forgotten. Sometimes I reach for his coffee mug in the cabinet before I remember there's no one to pour for anymore. My hands tremble as I set it back. But grief is not allowed to be private here, not in this fractured family. Harper wastes no time. She appears one afternoon at my door, lips pressed into a hard line, a sheaf of papers in her hand. She doesn't bother with pleasantries. You can't stay here, she says, shoving the documents at me. This was Elijah's house, not yours. I have every right to ask you to leave. I glance at the paperwork, legal forms full of jargon and signatures that don't look quite right. Something about them feels off, but my mind is too fogged with loss to make sense of the details. Harper's eyes flick over me, sharp and calculating. I can feel her anger, her urgency, and the dark thrill she gets from seeing me off balance. I've spoken to a lawyer, she continues, voice tight. If you don't leave willingly, I'll have you removed. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I want to fight back. To shout that this house was just as much mine as Elijah's, that I built this family with my own hands while she stood on the sidelines, tearing it apart piece by piece. But the words lodge in my throat, swallowed by exhaustion. I take the papers and shut the door, my heart pounding so loudly I'm certain she must hear it. News spreads fast in families like ours. Lorraine calls within hours, voice dripping with false sympathy and barely concealed glee. I heard Harper's giving you trouble, she says. If you need a place to stay, I suppose I could clear out the spare room. There's a pause, just long enough to let the barb sink in. Of course, you'll have to pull your weight, help around the house. Maybe it's time you started thinking about other people for a change. I recognize the power play for what it is. Lorraine's chance to finally be the one in charge, to see me brought low. She drops hints about selling Elijah's things, splitting the proceeds, doing what's best for everyone. She pretends she's trying to help, but every offer comes with a price. All the old resentments resurface, sharper now in the wake of Elijah's death. I hang up, feeling more alone than ever. The house is no longer a refuge. Everywhere I look, I see evidence of my erasure. Photos taken down, furniture rearranged. The garden I once tended now wild and neglected. Harper makes her presence felt in the smallest, most cutting ways. She leaves notes for me, reminders to clean up after myself, lists of things that don't belong here anymore. Her message is clear. This is her domain now, and I am nothing more than an unwelcome ghost. At night I can't sleep. Memories crowd my mind. My mother in her final years, bitter and alone, railing against a world that forgot her. I remember the coldness in her voice, the emptiness of her house, the way she seemed to shrink as her anger grew. I see myself mirrored in those memories, haunted by the fear that I am destined to end the same way. Sometimes, when the darkness becomes too much, I leave the house and drive to the cemetery. There is comfort in the hush of midnight, the soft glow of streetlights on polished stone. I sit beside Elijah's grave and speak to him, words tumbling out in a whisper, apologies, confessions, pleas for forgiveness. My reflection shimmers in the black marble, gaunt and hollow-eyed, a stranger's face staring back. "I'm so sorry, Elijah," I murmur. "I tried to protect you. I tried to love you the best way I knew how." There's never any answer, only the rustle of wind through the trees and the distant hum of the highway. But I stay until the sun begins to rise, until I can almost convince myself he's listening. On my way home one morning, Harper's car pulls into the driveway just as I'm unlocking the door. She steps out, looking me up and down with open disgust. "You don't belong here anymore," she says, voice low and venomous. "You never did." I swallow the retort, holding on to what little dignity I have left. Inside, my grief twists into something darker: shame, hopelessness, the urge to surrender. There are days I think about giving up. I see my mother's silhouette in the window, hear her voice echoing down the hallway. "This is what happens when you show weakness. This is how they win." I remember her bitter tears, her loneliness, and I wonder if she felt as lost as I do now. But then Dean appears, unexpected as always. He finds me one afternoon sitting on the back porch, staring at nothing, lost in a fog. He doesn't say anything at first, just sits beside me, his presence solid and real. After a long silence, he finally speaks. "Don't let her rewrite your story. That's what she wants. For you to disappear, to be the villain in her version of events. You're stronger than that. You always have been." I want to believe him, but the truth feels slippery, just out of reach. Still, there's comfort in his words, a faint spark of the woman I used to be. A few days later, as I sift through the pile of mail on the kitchen table, I find an envelope with no return address. Inside is a single sheet of paper, typed in bold, uneven letters. "Trust no one in the family. They're all hiding something. Watch your back." There is no signature, no hint of who sent it. My hands shake as I read it again and again, heart pounding with fear and suspicion. The message is clear. Whatever is happening here, it goes deeper than I thought. I tuck the letter away, suddenly more alert, more wary. The walls may be closing in, but I'm not done fighting, not yet. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being doubted, not just by others, but by yourself. In the days after the anonymous letter, that loneliness stalked me from room to room, sharpening every shadow, every silence, until I could barely trust my own thoughts. But it also awakened something in me. A stubbornness, or maybe desperation. I knew I couldn't simply wait for the world to break me. If there were secrets, I needed to find them. If only to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined the darkness gathering around us all these years. I started with what I had: fragments, hints, and the quiet support of Dean. He'd always been good with details, remembering names and faces long after I'd forgotten them. I called him one afternoon, voice trembling. He came over with a stack of notes and a grim look in his eyes. Together, we laid everything out on the dining table: old family photos, Harper's college records, wedding invitations, scraps of printouts Dean had quietly collected. I dug into Elijah's old emails, searching for patterns, for anything that felt out of place. Dean was meticulous, cross-referencing names and addresses. I could see his guilt eating away at him. He spoke less than usual, but every word was heavy. "Did you ever wish you'd done more?" I asked, not daring to look at him. Dean nodded, his voice rough. All the time. I should have seen what she was doing to him. To you. The deeper we dug, the stranger things became. Harper's records weren't just incomplete, they contradicted each other. Her maiden name changed on old social media profiles. There were graduation photos from schools she'd never mentioned. A birth certificate with a different middle name than the one on her marriage license. Dean pointed out the inconsistencies one by one, laying them out like puzzle pieces. But the picture that emerged was unnerving. A woman who was always vanishing, always remaking herself. I found a string of emails to an account I didn't recognize. Short messages, cryptic, always signed with different initials. Thanks for the update. Everything's on track. Let me know if you need more. No details, no context. Dean followed the address and uncovered forums where people traded advice on changing identities, on starting over with a clean slate. I stared at the screen, chilled by the implication. Harper hadn't just left a trail of failed relationships. She'd left her very self behind, again and again. Every new clue pulled me further from certainty. I remembered arguments with Elijah, his defensiveness, his worry that I was digging into things that didn't matter. But now I wondered if he had known more than he ever admitted. If he'd been protecting her, or protecting himself. Lorraine's bitterness, always a low hum in the background, suddenly turned dangerous. She showed up at my door with her own demands, all honeyed smiles and veiled threats. She claimed she wanted to help, but every suggestion she made led me further from the truth. When I refused to hand over my research, she accused me of holding out, of keeping secrets. One evening, I found the lock on my filing cabinet broken, notes scattered across the floor. I knew it was Lorraine. She left a message on my phone that night, her voice sharp. Family's just another weapon if you know how to use it. She was right, in her own twisted way. Family ties here were ropes, binding, constricting, pulling tight until there was no room to breathe. Every day I fought to keep my footing, to hold on to the memories of Elijah before everything soured. Lorraine wasn't just sabotaging my search. She was stoking the fires of suspicion in the community, feeding Harper's campaign against me. Harper, sensing my resolve, grew more brazen in her attacks. She started telling neighbors that I was losing my mind, that I'd always been forgetful, prone to confusion, not quite herself, since Elijah died. She'd laugh about it in the grocery store, voice just loud enough for others to hear. She's not well, you know. Grief does strange things. I worry she's not safe on her own. The word spread like wildfire. Invitations stopped. People stopped answering my calls. The world shrank. Doubt began to seep into everything. I found myself second-guessing every decision, every memory. Was I really seeing what was there? Or had I fallen into paranoia? I'd lose track of time, misplace things, forget appointments I'd just made. Once, I caught my own reflection in a window and startled at the stranger staring back, hair wild, eyes shadowed, face drawn with worry. Dean noticed. He tried to anchor me, coming over more often, bringing groceries, double-checking my notes. "I know you're scared," he said quietly one night. "But you're not crazy. You're not imagining this." His belief steadied me, at least for a little while. Desperate for something concrete, I returned to the one place I'd avoided, Harper and Elijah's old bedroom. It felt like trespassing, but I couldn't stop myself. The room was pristine, too clean, as if Harper had scrubbed every trace of my son from its surfaces. Still, I searched, opening drawers, feeling beneath the mattress, running my fingers along the seams of the closet. In the back of the closet, I found a small, battered box, dusty and hidden behind stacks of blankets. Inside were newspaper clippings, wedding announcements, police reports, missing person stories. All women, all from towns Harper had lived in before. My heart thudded as I scanned the names. One story was circled in red. A woman's body never found. A husband remarried within months. I found a drawer beneath the bed, its lock stubborn but breakable with a sharp twist. Inside were more documents. IDs with Harper's photo and different names, credit cards with unfamiliar monograms, faded love letters to men whose names I didn't recognize. Each artifact was a new mask, another life abandoned. Fear twisted in my gut, but the deepest blow came as I searched Elijah's old desk. There, taped to the underside of a drawer, was a small, leather-bound diary. My hands shook as I pried it loose. I read the first lines, Elijah's handwriting, careful and tight, as if he were afraid someone would see. I don't know who to trust anymore. Harper says I'm just like my mother, weak, needy, too attached. She tells me not to listen, but I can't help feeling something's wrong. I'm scared, but I don't know how to leave. I read on, pages filled with his confusion, his fear, his regret. Confessions of arguments, apologies he never voiced. Pleas for help he never sent. Harper's cruelty, her manipulation, her threats, all laid out in aching detail. My son, lost and alone, crushed by secrets he was never meant to carry. My tears came then. Hot, silent, unstoppable. I clutched the diary to my chest, heart aching with guilt and relief. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't been alone in seeing the truth. But I also knew, as I closed the book and wiped my face, that the real danger had only just begun. The secrets I'd uncovered were darker than anything I'd suspected. And now, armed with the truth, I was more isolated than ever. Haunted, yes, but finally awake. The morning after I found Elijah's diary, the house felt transformed. Not lighter, never that, but awake in a new, painful way. I sat at the kitchen table, the little book spread open before me, torn pages smoothed flat, red pen lines stark as blood. I read his words over and over, searching for hidden meanings, desperate to piece together what I'd missed. She says I'm weak, says Mom's the reason I'm broken. I hear her voice in my sleep, telling me not to trust anyone. I tried to tell Mom, but she always makes excuses. Maybe she can't see it. Help. That word, underlined, jagged, desperate, rang in my ears. Elijah had reached for me even as I kept telling myself he was happy, that his distance was just adulthood, just growing up. How had I been so blind? Clarity came in flashes, memories of arguments, of Elijah's eyes darting toward Harper before he'd answer me, of the way he apologized for things he'd never done. In the diary, he described Harper's accusations, the way she'd twist my every word. He wrote about how she'd isolate him from Dean, how she'd convince him that Lorraine and I were poison, that no one really loved him except her. Reading his pain, I felt my own shame and fury coil together. All the years I'd spent blaming myself for the rift, Harper had been feeding it, drip by poisonous drip. My grief for Elijah became sharper, edged with the need for justice. I couldn't save him, but I could fight for the truth. Dean became my anchor. I showed him the diary, my hands shaking as I turned the pages. He read in silence, jaw clenched, his own regret flickering in his eyes. I let her get away with too much, he said finally. I thought Elijah was strong enough. I should have done more. I'm sorry. I put my hand over his. We both should have seen, but we see now. We started comparing notes, his findings, my memories, the strange gaps in Harper's history. We made a list of questions, a timeline of Elijah's decline. It became clear. Every time Elijah tried to reach out, Harper cut him off. Every time I came close to reconnecting, she'd start a new conflict, plant a new lie. She'd made herself the only person Elijah could depend on, even as she was the one hurting him. But it wasn't just Harper. The family itself was broken, and Lorraine was at the center of the fracture. I went to her house, diary in hand, determined not to leave until she faced her own part in this. She answered the door, eyebrows arched, mouth twisted in her usual smirk. What now, big sister? Come to lecture me about family? I held up the diary. Elijah was in pain, Lorraine. We all failed him, but you stoked every fire Harper started. You chose resentment over help. Why? Her mask slipped for a moment, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. I was tired of always coming second, she spat. You always got everything. Elijah, the sympathy, the story. Maybe if you'd listened, he'd still be here. You think you're so righteous, Harper's voice echoed in my mind, from the last argument in the hallway, the smirk on her lips as she dismissed my warnings. But you're just afraid of the truth. I looked Lorraine in the eye, searching for something human. We lost him. But we don't have to lose ourselves. You can help me stop her, or you can keep hiding. She didn't answer, but she didn't slam the door either. That was something. At home, I sat in the study, surrounded by evidence. I took the torn pages from Elijah's diary and taped them together, the red ink under help burning a hole in my heart. I arranged Dean's notes beside them, timelines, names, addresses. every piece made the picture clearer and more damning. Harper hadn't just manipulated Elijah, she'd orchestrated his isolation, her gaslighting a calculated assault. But the community didn't see the truth. News of my investigations had spread. Harper, always careful, whispered to neighbors, hinting that grief had broken me, that I was becoming dangerous, vengeful. I'd see people cross the street rather than meet my eyes, hear the stories circulating, how I'd never gotten over losing control, how I'd driven Elijah away. The more I pushed, the more unhinged I appeared. Even Dean's loyalty came at a price. He risked his reputation every time he was seen at my house, but he never wavered. "You're not crazy," he told me. "You're not alone." I called the local police, begging them to listen, to read Elijah's diary, to see the forged documents Harper had used. The officer, a woman with tired eyes, promised to look into it, but her expression said otherwise. I realized, with a bitter twist, that Harper had anticipated this too. Her campaign had worked. My sanity was the question, not Harper's guilt. I made a choice. I would expose Harper, even if it destroyed whatever was left of my reputation. I photocopied the diary, Dean's notes, every email and document we'd collected. I mailed them to anyone who might listen. Lawyers, local reporters, even old family friends. The truth would come out even if no one wanted to hear it. Late one afternoon, as rain battered the windows, there was a loud knock at the door. I opened it to find two uniformed officers, faces grim, rain slickers dripping. "Ma'am, we have a warrant to search the premises," the older officer said, voice careful but firm. "You've been accused of foul play in Elijah's death." For a moment, the world tilted, spinning around me. I couldn't breathe. Behind them, Harper stood on the sidewalk, arms folded, eyes glittering with satisfaction. Lorraine hovered nearby, pale and shaken, not meeting my gaze. I stepped aside, heart pounding, head spinning with equal parts terror and fury. They moved through my house, rifling through drawers, gathering every scrap of paper, every remnant of Elijah they could find. I watched as they took the diary, the taped-together pages, the red ink under help. Dean arrived in time to see the chaos, standing beside me, jaw clenched. "This isn't over," he whispered, and I knew he was right. They could search my home, strip away every last comfort, but I still had the truth. I wouldn't let Harper win, not this time. As the officers left, evidence bags in hand, I stood at the window, rain streaking the glass. My reflection looked back, tired, battered, but alive. I wasn't the woman Harper thought she'd broken. I was a mother reckoning with the past, determined to fight for her son's memory, no matter the cost. I never expected the truth to be so lonely. Not even grief could prepare me for what it meant to sit in a gray-walled room, hands folded, eyes fixed on the chipped edge of a police interview table, while strangers picked apart my life with cool detachment. The investigation had become a public spectacle. Neighbors gossiping, old friends vanishing overnight, even my own family stepping away. The walls felt as though they were pressing closer with every question. They sat across from me, not hostile but not sympathetic, their faces unreadable. One officer read from a stack of notes, voice steady, expression fixed. "Mrs. Ellis, walk us through the months before Elijah's death, in your own words." I tried to speak plainly, but every answer landed wrong, distorted by their suspicion. I told them about the diary, about Harper's cruelty, about the forged documents, and the mounting isolation. But every time I described Harper's manipulations, the officers' faces tightened, pens scratching across their notebooks. "Did you and your daughter-in-law have a contentious relationship?" "Yes," I admitted. "But it wasn't because I hated her. I was afraid for Elijah. She controlled him. Mrs. Ellis, can you provide proof of these claims?" The question came like a slap. I stumbled, searching for words. I found notes, emails, Elijah's diary. "Isn't it possible," the younger officer asked, "that your grief has colored your memory? That you're seeing things through the pain of loss?" My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, to make them see, but the words twisted in my throat, turning into something ugly. My pain, my love, was on trial as much as my actions. Doubt seeped in around the edges, cold and insidious. When they finally let me go, it wasn't freedom. It was exile. I sat in the lobby, feeling the stares of every person who passed, Some avoided my gaze. Others looked at me with barely contained judgment. The rumors had spread, violent, eager, unstoppable. The trial came quickly, an ugly blur of legal motions and whispered conversations. I took the stand. Hands clenched tight, the courtroom a sea of faces, some familiar, most not. The prosecution built a narrative out of fragments. My supposed jealousy, my mental state, the family rifts that Harper and Lorraine painted in broad, damning strokes. Harper was called to testify. She walked to the witness stand in a somber black dress, eyes rimmed in red. She looked fragile, perfect, a portrait of the grieving widow. But her performance was flawless. She dabbed her eyes, voice trembling just enough. "Your Honor," Harper said. "She's obsessed." She always hated me. She'd show up unannounced, try to turn Elijah against me, make wild accusations. Her voice broke. She couldn't stand to lose control. I was afraid of her sometimes, truly afraid. The room was silent but electric. I felt myself shrinking under her words, anger and disbelief warring with shame. It was her word against mine, and she had the sympathy of the room. When she looked over at me, her eyes flashed with something cold and triumphant. Lorraine took her turn next, seizing the moment as only she could. She spoke of childhood slights, of years spent in her sister's shadow, painting herself as the wounded, ignored sibling. "I tried to warn everyone," Lorraine insisted, "but no one listened to me. I just wanted Elijah to be happy." Every sentence was another wedge driven between me and the community. She spun family squabbles into maliciousness, mistakes into patterns. There was no room for nuance. The old resentments I'd tried to bury for years were now out in the open, rotting in the light. Dean sat in the back of the courtroom, eyes fixed on me. He'd risked everything, his job, his reputation, to help gather evidence. He met with lawyers, scoured old records, chased down every scrap of Harper's history. I watched him as the defense attorney called him to the stand, his hands shaking slightly. Dean told them what he'd seen, how Harper isolated Elijah, how she twisted stories, how her past didn't add up. He described her aliases, the forged documents, the missing records from her previous marriages. But every revelation was met with skepticism. "Mr. Callahan," the prosecutor said, "how do you explain your close involvement with Mrs. Ellis? Isn't it true you have a history of—" The implication hung in the air. Troubled past, poor judgment, loyalty mistaken for obsession. Dean's jaw tightened. "I failed Elijah. I failed his mother. But the facts don't lie. Harper is not who she claims to be. Please, look at the evidence." Still, I could feel the mood of the room shifting against us. The community was split, neighbors whispering in pews, old friends debating my sanity at the grocery store. Some people avoided me entirely. Others sent short, clipped messages of support, afraid to be caught on the wrong side. It was a referendum, not just on my actions, but on who I had always been. I sat in the witness box, hands clenched, listening to the prosecution paint me as a woman unhinged by loss, fixated on Harper, incapable of moving on. Their courtroom sketch would show me gray-haired, frail, wild-eyed, clinging to the stand, desperate. Every night, I lay awake, replaying every moment on the stand. Had I said too much? Not enough? Did my voice shake when I should have been strong? I began to lose track of what was real. Doubt crept in, whispering that maybe I was as broken as they believed. But Dean never stopped digging. Even as the trial dragged on and hope faded, he pored over every piece of Harper's past. He contacted people in towns she'd left behind, tracked down old friends, neighbors, distant relatives. One morning, as the court reconvened, Dean slipped me a folded piece of paper. On it was a single name, an address, and a line. Proof: Harper's last mother-in-law. Missing persons case still open. Police ignored it. That changed everything. My lawyer called for an emergency hearing, submitting the documents Dean had found, reports from another state, photos of Harper with her former husband and his mother, who had vanished under eerily similar circumstances. The story broke through the fog of doubt, unsettling even the judge. Harper's composure cracked for the first time. As her attorney tried to object, she glanced my way. No more tears, just fury and fear. The community buzzed, sides shifted, people whispered, some in support, some in disbelief. The old certainties were gone, replaced by confusion and suspicion. Loyalties were shattered. There was no going back. I sat in the courtroom, hands still clenched, as the judge called a recess. My future hung in the balance, but I was no longer alone. The truth, fragile, battered, but real, had finally started to surface. I would keep fighting. For Elijah, for myself, for all the women silenced before me. There comes a moment in every story when the shadows finally break, and what's been hidden can no longer stay in the dark. I felt that moment approaching, a strange calm settling over me as the pieces fell into place. Armed with Dean's evidence and the remnants of Elijah's diary, I knew it was time to face Harper, truly face her, with nothing left to lose. I arranged for us to meet at the house one afternoon, knowing she would come if only to gloat. The living room felt smaller with just the two of us, Harper poised by the window, backlit by waning light, her expression unreadable. "I suppose you want to beg for forgiveness," she said, voice syrupy, a practiced mask of concern. I slipped my phone into my pocket, recording. My hands were steady for the first time in weeks. "I want the truth," I said. "Not your version. Elijah's mine, the one you've buried." She laughed, sharp and brittle. "The truth? No one here wants the truth, least of all you. You've always needed someone to blame for your failures. Elijah was miserable and it was your fault. I just made him see it." I kept my gaze on her. "He wrote about you. In his own hand. He knew you were lying to him, isolating him. I have his words, Harper, and now I have proof of what you did before, what you did to your last mother-in-law." She froze, just for a breath, then recovered with a sly smile. "You can't prove anything. No one will ever believe you. You're a broken woman, obsessed and alone. I know how to play this game, and I always win." Her confidence was chilling. She believed her own invincibility. After all, she'd watched a whole town bend to her story, seen a court question my sanity. But as she leaned closer, voice low and taunting, I saw the cracks in her composure. "You pushed him too far," she hissed. "You made him weak. I just did what I had to do. And if you think anyone cares now, you're even more pathetic than I thought." At that moment, the door creaked behind us. Lorraine stood at the threshold, eyes wide, face ashen. She had come to eavesdrop, but the reality of Harper's words struck her silent. I turned to Lorraine, my voice unsteady but determined. "You heard her. You always said you wanted the truth. Well, here it is. All of it." Harper rounded on Lorraine, voice rising. "And what about you, Lorraine? How many times did you feed me stories, plant doubts? We're not so different." For the first time, Lorraine faltered. She looked at me, tears brimming, guilt etched deep. "I never meant for any of this. I was jealous. I wanted you to hurt, but not like this, not Elijah." Silence crackled between us. Then slowly Lorraine backed away, her facade crumbling. Harper's cold smile faded as I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb hovering over the screen. "You're not as untouchable as you think," I said, letting her see the recording light. Panic flickered in Harper's eyes, the realization finally dawning that her own words would undo her. She lunged, snatching for the phone, but I stepped back. "It's too late," I said. "Everything you've done, everything you've said, it's over." Dean arrived moments later, clutching a folder thick with evidence. He handed it off to the authorities, his face set with grim satisfaction. "It's all there," he told the detective. "Bank records, false IDs, missing persons reports, everything to tie Harper to what happened here and before." As the police questioned Harper, the story began to spread. The same community that had once shunned me now whispered a different tune. Neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid me sent tentative messages, apologies threaded through their words. The tide was turning, slowly, awkwardly, but turning all the same. But inside me, the struggle wasn't over. Justice and revenge sat side by side, each demanding its own price. I replayed Harper's confession in my mind, over and over, wrestling with the urge to see her punished. Not just for Elijah, but for every woman she'd hurt, every family she'd poisoned. I thought about the woman from the missing persons report, the last mother-in-law who had vanished without a trace. The cycle had nearly claimed me too. Yet justice, I realized, wasn't about my satisfaction. It was about truth, about ending the story, not rewriting it in anger. As news of Harper's exposure swept through the community, Dean and I met one last time on the back porch. Rain fell in steady sheets, turning the yard to silver. "You did it," he said quietly. You finally broke through. I nodded, but the victory felt hollow. At what cost? I whispered. I lost everything. Elijah, my family, even Lorraine. Dean put a hand on my shoulder. You did what you had to do, and you weren't alone. We watched together as the police arrived for Harper. She tried to run, grabbed her purse, bolted for the car. Lorraine, shaken but desperate, tried to help, fumbling with keys, shouting that it wasn't too late to fix things. But the police were faster. They intercepted Harper at the end of the drive, handcuffing her as Lorraine sobbed on the curb. The sirens faded, leaving only silence and the taste of rain. I stood at the window, watching it all. Harper's mask was gone, her face twisted with rage and fear. Lorraine's shoulders shook with grief, guilt overwhelming her. For a brief, bitter moment, I pitied them both. I had exposed the truth, but the price was steep. Family, reputation, innocence, all lost to the shadows. I told myself it was worth it, that Elijah's memory deserved nothing less. But in the quiet that followed, I felt the echo of every choice, every mistake, every wound. As the community whispered and the police cars disappeared, I closed my eyes and let the ache settle in. Justice had come, and with it, the end of Harper's reign. The cycle was broken, but the scars would remain. The day the police took Harper and Lorraine away, the world moved in slow motion. I watched from the window as neighbors gathered on their porches, whispering in disbelief. Sirens wailed down our quiet street, a sound so alien that it split the familiar air. Harper glared at the crowd, her mask finally gone, while Lorraine's face was pale and streaked with tears. For all their cruelty and cunning, they both looked so small in the back of that cruiser, swallowed by consequences. The house was silent after the police left, the kind of silence that seeps into your bones. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. I was vindicated, yes. Officers and neighbors came by, some to offer apologies, others to deliver awkward casseroles and half-hearted reassurances. Reporters called, wanting statements, but I had no words for them. The truth was out, but my son was still gone. No amount of justice could return Elijah's laughter to these rooms. Dean arrived late that evening, the dusk stretching shadows across the empty boxes I'd packed. His steps were hesitant as he entered, carrying nothing but his own uncertainty. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the toll of the fight we'd just survived together. I never thought I'd see the day, he said softly, his voice thick. They're actually gone. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The house around us felt both too full and too empty, crowded with the ghosts of everything we'd lost and everything we'd managed to salvage. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, catching on floating motes. Tiny worlds suspended in the air, moving on even as everything else stopped. Dean glanced at the stack of boxes, the bare walls. You leaving? Maybe not leaving, I said, voice thin. Just starting over, trying to figure out what comes next. He looked down, hands twisting. I know I could have done more, sooner. I let Elijah slip away because I was afraid I'd be in the way or say the wrong thing. I carry that with me every day. His words hung between us, raw and unfiltered. I shook my head. You were here when it mattered most. None of this would have come to light without you. A silence stretched out. Then Dean stepped closer, his gaze steady for the first time. I want to help. If you'll let me, we could rebuild in whatever way you need. His words were an unexpected comfort, not a promise to fill the void, but a gentle offer to stand beside me in it. I turned, surveying the empty rooms, the walls where Elijah's childhood drawings once hung, the kitchen that had seen so much joy and pain. The emptiness was overwhelming, but there was also something else. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the faintest tug of hope. You survived them all. You broke the curse, Dean said, almost in awe. I let those words linger, rolling them over in my mind. Had I really broken the cycle? The hurt, the bitterness, the old wounds, were they finally finished or just sleeping? I wanted to believe that something new could grow in the space they left behind. The days blurred together as I packed up what was left of our family life. I found myself sorting not just belongings, but memories, deciding what to keep, what to let go, what to forgive. I started attending a support group for people who'd survived family trauma. At first, I sat in the back, arms crossed, heart guarded, but over time, I found myself speaking, sharing my story with others who understood what it meant to be broken and still choose to heal. Slowly, the community's perception shifted. People who once crossed the street to avoid me now stopped to talk. There were more apologies, more awkward conversations, but there was also a new respect in their eyes, an understanding that maybe I had not been the villain in their stories after all. Sympathy, tentative and fragile, replaced the suspicion that had shadowed me for so long. There was no sudden transformation, no perfect ending. Grief still found me in the quiet hours, a reminder that love and loss are forever entwined. But the pain no longer owned me. It was simply part of the landscape, a scar, not an open wound. One rainy afternoon, as I cleared out the last of Elijah's things, I found a small envelope wedged behind a bookshelf. It was addressed in his handwriting, careful and neat. Mom. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single page, written in the same red pen he'd used in his diary. If you're reading this, it means things got bad. I'm sorry I didn't say more when I had the chance. Please don't blame yourself. You did your best. I know you love me. I know you tried. Let yourself be happy again. Forgive them if you can. Forgive yourself, especially. Find peace. That's all I ever wanted for you, Mom. Love, Elijah. The tears came then, soft, cleansing, not the violent sobs of guilt, but something lighter. Elijah's words were a balm, a last gift. I pressed the letter to my heart and let myself feel all of it. The grief, the relief, the love that had outlasted even death. Later, I sat on the back porch as the storm clouds parted, sunlight breaking through. Dean joined me, and together we watched the world shift, slowly, painfully, but toward something new. The chains that bound our family were broken. The future was uncertain, but it was finally ours to shape. Healing, I've learned, is neither swift nor straight. It comes in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes wild, sometimes so subtle you almost miss its arrival. After the dust settled and the doors closed on a chapter that had defined too many years of my life, I stood at the edge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. Forgiveness did not come easily. For a while, I raged against it. Why should I forgive Harper, or even Lorraine, after all they'd done? Why forgive myself for my own blindness and missteps, my stubbornness that sometimes looked like love, but sometimes looked like fear? The questions circled my mind in the dark, tugging me back toward old wounds. Some days I thought about Lorraine, alone in a cell, her bitterness exposed for all the world to see. I wrote her a letter, hesitant, unsure if I would ever send it. I wanted to ask her, did you ever really hate me? Or was it just easier than loving me? I never found the words I needed, so I waited. One afternoon, as summer edged into fall, a letter arrived, neat handwriting postmarked from the county jail. It was from Lorraine. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I deserve it. But I want you to know I'm sorry, not just for Elijah, but for all of it. I spent my life angry at you for being the strong one, for getting out, for keeping going when I couldn't. You deserved better from me, and so did Elijah. I hope someday you'll find peace. Maybe then I will too. I read the letter in the garden, letting her words wash over me. The old ache was still there, but there was also a new softness, a space that might become forgiveness with time. I wasn't ready to answer, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to. Dean was my anchor through it all. After everything, we found ourselves drawn together, not out of desperation, but out of something honest, something earned. We talked about the past, about our mistakes, about what it means to lose and to keep moving forward. We can't choose our scars, Dean said as we worked side by side in the yard, but we can choose how we heal. He dug the hole for a new tree, steady and patient. I placed the sapling, hands in the cool earth. As we pressed the soil around its roots, I felt something inside me settle, as if the act itself was a promise. Life continues, and so will I. The days grew longer and lighter. We built new routines, quiet breakfasts, evening walks, sharing laughter that was small but real. Dean didn't try to fill the emptiness Elijah left. He simply stood with me in it, and that was enough. The community, too, began to shift. They organized a small ceremony at the park in Elijah's honor, a bench by the playground, a plaque with his name, and a simple inscription: loved, missed, remembered. I stood with Dean among old neighbors and new friends as the town's pastor spoke kind, awkward words about grief and second chances. It was not the grand gesture of forgiveness I'd once imagined, but it was enough. A recognition that Elijah mattered, and that the story of our family didn't end in scandal or silence. After the ceremony, a group of mothers approached me, some with their own wounds, their own stories of loss and endurance. They spoke of Elijah's kindness, how he'd tutored their children, fixed their broken fences, smiled at strangers. I listened, letting their words fill the empty places inside me. He was gone, but his goodness remained, echoing in the lives he'd touched. Slowly, I began to see myself not just as the woman who lost, but as the woman who endured. I took comfort in small things, the feel of dirt under my nails as I tended the new tree, the rhythm of Dean's breathing beside me as we sat in quiet companionship, the simple act of making my own breakfast and eating it in the sunlit kitchen. I started volunteering at the library, joining a group for women who'd survived their own storms. I told my story, not out of shame, but out of hope that it might help someone else. Motherhood, I realized, was never about perfection. It was about showing up, about love stubborn enough to weather betrayal and heartbreak. It was about holding on, even when everything else slipped away. Womanhood, too, was not a single shape. It was resilience, grace, the willingness to begin again. I was not defined by loss or resentment. I was something new. On the anniversary of Elijah's passing, I sat by the new tree, watching sunlight flicker through its leaves. Dean brought 2 mugs of coffee, setting one beside me without a word. I thought of Elijah's last letter, his hope that I'd find peace. I whispered a promise to him, I will. A breeze stirred the branches, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight in my chest loosen. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. The pain was a part of me, but it was not all of me. I was not my anger, not my regret, not even my grief. That evening, as dusk fell and the house filled with quiet laughter and the warmth of something like belonging, I realized that I had reclaimed my life, not as it was, but as it could be. Not perfect, not free from scars, but honest, open, and mine. I am not who I was. I am not what they called me. I am not what I lost. I am still here. I am finally free. There's a quiet that comes after the storm, the hush of a life rebuilt from ashes. I once believed family was defined by blood and obligation, by the long, tangled roots of memory and resentment. But grief and survival have taught me otherwise. Family is who stands beside you when the world falls apart. It's the people you choose, the ones who choose you back. I started this new chapter with Dean, not because I needed someone to fill the silence, but because we'd found a way to build something real together. There was no rush. We learned each other's scars, spoke about the past only when it helped lighten the burden. We discovered laughter again. Small, surprised moments that reminded us life could still be generous. The house transformed along with us. I took down the old, faded photos, images blurred by time and pain, and replaced them with new ones. Pictures of Dean and me planting the tree in the yard, neighbors gathered at the community picnic, children playing in the grass. Even a group shot from the support group, all of us smiling, linked by a common resilience. The walls felt lighter, each new frame an act of defiance against the gloom that had once threatened to consume us. Sometimes I still caught myself pausing at the stairwell, remembering Elijah as a boy, his laughter echoing up the steps. That ache would never leave completely, but it was softer now, mingled with pride, with the knowledge that his memory had become a quiet blessing, not a curse. Dean noticed, too. One evening, as we finished hanging the last of the new photos, he stepped back and studied the wall. "You showed me what resilience looks like," he said, voice gentle. "You didn't just survive, you rebuilt." His words warmed me more than I could say. I smiled and squeezed his hand, feeling the steady comfort in his touch. "I had to," I replied, "if I wanted anything left to give." But giving, I realized, was part of what saved me. After so many years of isolation, of feeling misunderstood or judged, I wanted to help others find a way out of their own darkness. I joined forces with other women in the community, creating a safe place for those escaping abuse, neglect, or the loneliness that clings when family fails you. We shared stories, resources, laughter, and sometimes tears. Each life touched became a thread in a new tapestry of belonging. I saw myself in many of their faces, hesitant at first, battered by loss or betrayal, yet still quietly hopeful. I offered them what I had learned, that pain can bind us, but so can hope, that the world is wide enough for second chances. As the seasons changed, our house became a gathering place. Dean and I hosted Sunday suppers for the neighbors who had once kept their distance. Children played in the backyard, the air bright with their shouts. My garden, long neglected, bloomed again, thanks to hands both young and old. The kitchen filled with new recipes, borrowed and invented, each meal a celebration of how far we'd come. The tree we planted grew strong, its branches stretching toward the sky. Sometimes I'd sit beneath its shade and read Elijah's letter, letting his words settle in my heart. I understood now that forgiveness was not forgetting, and that love was not erased by absence. I found peace not in moving on, but in carrying him with me as I moved forward. The legacy of Harper and Lorraine ended where their choices left them, sealed behind bars and bitterness, cut off by their own betrayals. Their stories would not shape mine anymore. I wished them peace, even if I doubted they'd ever find it. Their chapters were closed. Mine, somehow, had only just begun. One night, after a long day spent tending the garden and preparing a meal with Dean, I sat on the back porch as dusk settled. The air was cool, the sky a wash of colors. Dean joined me, resting a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You know," he said, "I spent a long time thinking family was something you were stuck with. Now I know it's something you build. Thank you for showing me that." I squeezed his hand, gratitude welling in my chest. "I'm grateful too, for all the ways we found our way back to living." We watched the stars appear, quiet and certain above us. In the stillness, my thoughts turned inward, to the woman I had become. I was no longer defined by loss, no longer haunted by the ghosts of resentment. I was not the sum of other people's choices. I was resilient, compassionate, open to change. I was, finally, at peace. Family is not only the blood that binds you, but the love you nurture, the trust you earn, and the forgiveness you choose to give, even to yourself. It is the laughter at the end of a long day, the comfort of shared silence, the strength to help others when you can. It is what you create from the ruins. Harper and Lorraine's legacies would not reach beyond their own mistakes. Mine would be different, a story not of ruin, but of rebuilding. I had lost and found myself in equal measure, and that was enough. As I stood to head inside, Dean beside me, the house aglow with new warmth, I knew that this small, imperfect, chosen family was what I had been searching for all along. Belonging was not a gift handed down. It was a life you claimed, day by day, with every act of courage and kindness. In the end, I did not just survive. I belonged. If this story hit a nerve or made you question the shadows in your own family, you're not alone. Ever faced a secret no one believed? Tell us. What would you have done if you stood in her shoes? Every family hides a story. Maybe it's time to break the silence. Stick around. There's always another side to the story, and yours might be next.